paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and I'm delighted that you are joining us this evening because it's going to be one heck of a show. As many of you might know, I run a film festival in Eau Claire, Wisconsin called Midwest Weird Fest. We're now in our 7th year. Every year it's the first weekend of March. This year that's March 3 to 5. And we play a bunch of different genre films like horror and sci-fi, but we also play underground content. And what particularly interests me, and I think might interest this audience the most, is we normally have a wonderful range of the most cutting edge and the latest documentaries in the broader paranormal and Fortean and ufological and cryptid space. And tonight's guest is the director of one of those documentaries, and it is a heck of a film. I just adored this movie. It impressed me the second I saw it, so I'm so delighted we're screening it at the festival this year. Anyway, our guest tonight, he's the director of media relations for MUFON. He's a filmmaker, an on-camera personality, a writer, editor, researcher, content creator, and entrepreneur. His bio is just incredible, so I'm only going to hit on a few things, but he's what is probably going to interest all of you. He's the co-founder of MUFON Television, which is an online TV channel boasting the world's largest collection of commercial-free UAP-related material. He has won 19 national awards, including 4 EBE awards, the Telly Award, and the Aegis Award for excellence in broadcasting 4 times. He currently makes his own shows, including Bigger Questions, Spacetime, MUFON Presents, and more. And he maintains his own independent production studio in Los Angeles, which is where I believe he is joining us tonight. Or joining us from tonight. He's the creator of 7 feature-length documentaries and dozens of original independent series episodes. And his most recent film, Accidental Truth, UFO Revelations, which is what I'll be screening at Midwest Weird Fest in Eau Claire this March, is to be released generally and wider later this year, and you all have to check it out as soon as it does drop. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the show, Ron James.
Hi, how are you, Dean?
I'm so excited to talk to you. We've had a little bit of a chat back and forth on the phone, but it's nice to have you actually here and you in your studio. That MUFON Presents sign just looks amazing, by the way. So cool.
Yeah, it's actually a video wall. So the whole set of the studio is made up of 3 different video walls.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I'd love to visit one day. If I'm ever in LA, I'm going to hit you up for a visit of your studio. Wow. That's a nice space. I could do with a space like that. I'm actually in the early stages of a little indie documentary myself at the moment, but I don't have a studio like that. That would be sweet. So tell me just a little bit. You have a fascinating bio. Like, I didn't read everything that I know about you, but you've worked like with major bands as well, doing music type productions like Smashing Pumpkins and Guns N' Roses and the Beach Boys, all bands which I adore. How did you move? Were you originally in UFO circles and then you got into production, or did you have a background in production, or what kind of came first, the chicken or the egg there?
Oh yeah, I started my first production company around the time of the OJ trial. I had a screen printing company, and I hired a company to make a video about screen printing, and I had so much fun doing that I sold the screen printing company and started my own studios. And so I've been an independent self-taught producer for about 22, 23 years now.
Wow. And did you always have an interest in UFOs, or did that come?
I've always had a passing interest in it. And then I got hired to produce a UFO event in Washington, D.C. called the X Conference. That was back in 2008. And I just ended up kind of getting sucked into the field and doing more and more production at conferences and shooting interviews and making shows and stuff about the UFO topic. I honestly believe it's one of, if not the most important question facing humanity is, are we alone in the universe? And the answer is proving to be way more complex than we could have imagined.
That's one of the things I loved about Accidental Truth is a lot of UFO documentaries, and a lot of people who are interested in the UFO topic tend to put on a specific believer or disbeliever hat. So they believe in extraterrestrial life, or they're a skeptic, or they believe it's paraphysical, or they believe it's creatures that live amongst us or alongside us. But you hit all of these things in the documentary. There's a wonderful part at the end where you start or towards the end where you start rolling out these different ideas. I thought that was excellent.
Well, anybody who, obviously the film is full of insiders that are saying things that they really haven't publicly said in ways that they haven't done it. So there's a lot of revelations, but I had to respect also their views that, that the ET hypothesis is, as one person says, it's a good place to start, but it's only a start.
And that's something which is getting a little more traction. I haven't seen it a lot, but it was wonderful to see it in your documentary. But certainly, you mentioned, the documentary even mentions the Hal Putoff paper, which Jason McLean and myself, we do another show on Untold Radio Network as well called Mysterious Library. And we recently looked at that paper. I think the paper was from last year, but Putoff puts forward this ultra-terrestrial potential, or this model that maybe there is this sequestered other civilization or culture that lives on this planet and doesn't perhaps come from distant stars. He also, like many of the folks on your documentary, doesn't rule out the potential of there being both, but he puts forward models or suggestions of research directions where we might look, if it was ultra-terrestrial, is the term that he uses, which is used a little bit differently to John Keel. But one of them is things like, well, this might explain why they're so interested in our atomic programs, because they don't want us to destroy the planet, because they've lived here all along. So I found that kind of stuff fascinating. And Putoff is mentioned again in your documentary, but do you think maybe Putoff has an inside track to that type of idea, and that's why he put that forward in that recent paper?
Well, absolutely, Hal does. Hal goes back with Colonel John Alexander way back into the 70s and beyond, and they've had their hands in a lot of stuff as far as these secret programs and secret knowledge and research into the ET thing. But even those guys, I don't think are completely read into the very depths of where this goes. I think they're somewhere in the middle. The true knowledge has been sequestered and buried away from almost everybody in very clever ways, going all the way back, 100 years. And these guys were doing these programs to study this stuff. They were privy to a lot of information, but I still don't think they were privy to all of it. But as far as Hal Putoff having inside knowledge about non-human intelligence, he absolutely does.
Speaking of the big thinkers and the big intellectuals in the field, he's not mentioned in your documentary, but I just love to hear your take. Traditionally, Jacques Valet, I think he is mentioned to the extent that you mentioned some of the metamaterials that Jacques looked at in the film.
Yeah, I couldn't really... I got so many great people for the film that I just didn't really want to spend time on people that didn't sit for me. So, yeah, his work is fantastic, but I couldn't get an interview with him. And, frankly, he was in a couple of other previous films, so it was no big deal. But Jacques has made fantastic contributions. And I think that a lot of his hypotheses are right on the money.
Do you think that this just interests me? Almost nothing to do with your film, just as far as your insights into it, because I know you're media director for MUFON, right? So you've obviously got your finger on the pulse. He seems to have had a sea change in the last couple of years with his book, Trinity, the Best Kept Secret. Before that, he'd seemed to be dismissive of a lot of crash retrieval stories and that type of idea. But now he seems to almost be at the forefront of suggesting there's been an ongoing history of these type of UFO crashes.
Well, I mean, he is known for being one of the ones that gave Garry Nolan supposed crash debris materials, and he was involved with some of the stuff that came out through Linda Moulton Howe and researching that. And yeah, he has to do that because we've got the evidence of these materials that have been studied. We've got the isotopic ratio information that just basically says, well, they couldn't have been made on planet Earth. It's almost impossible. And so a lot of these people are making sea changes based on what's coming out. Rather, they're changing their actual internal belief system, or they're changing their narrative to fit the information as it rolls out, is anybody's guess. My feeling is that for a lot of these guys, they're actually able to say more. So they're able to it's not that they're changing what they know or changing what they believe. They're changing what they're allowed to say, because there's guardians of this information, and there are people that are the gatekeepers that we do not know who they are, but nobody says anything that they're not permitted to say. And that's one of the reasons this film goes out on such a limb, is because we're really poking the bear.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because clearly, whatever the reality of the UFO phenomenon is, I think people would have to be naive to not think that the US government has had some plan in some type of spin or psyop or information control or cover up or something over the course of the last 80 or so years. So are you hitting much resistance with getting this film out? Because there seem to be an awful lot of pretty striking revelations in the movie, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I've been threatened by people. The distributor was threatened. I've been threatened with lawsuits for using clips that are clearly fair use. I have been, I've had my suspicions that the distributor themselves has an agenda for keeping this film from coming out. I've seen them take my information and coincidentally another film of way lesser quality, portraying some of the same information in a less credible manner.
Gosh.
Actually replaced me in the block. And I mean, we've got A-list talent. We've got sitting Congress people. We have the most well-known scientist on the planet. And these guys bumped me for a B movie. And I've had definite things have happened across the course of this. And, you know, right now, I'm not going to name names because, well, I'm just not going to. But yeah, it's a knockdown drag out over getting this thing released. And I've never, in the whole course of making this movie, I've been surveilled. I've felt my computer was being monitored. You know, just being the media relations director for MUFON means I'm the guy that talks to the press about MUFON's UFO reports, all that kind of stuff. So it kind of comes with the territory, because, you know, certainly the government keeps tabs on MUFON. I'm not saying that MUFON is like infiltrated or being manipulated, but they're certainly being watched, and that's just common sense. But yeah, this has not been an easy. It's been a year and a half since I sat down and started putting this out. It's been 14 years since I shot the first interview. This last year and a half has not been easy for me.
Well, I'm glad that we have a completed film, and I can't wait to screen it at the festival. Do you have an idea? Before I'm going to unpack some of the rest of what you just talked about, but do you have an idea when a general audience are going to be able to watch the movie, given that you've just hit sounds like a problem with the planned distributor? Or
it was supposed to come out at Christmas. We were, then it was supposed to come out in February. Then it was supposed to come out in March. I was assured that the release wouldn't go into Q2, but then I was told that at the same time I was receiving those assurances, the film had already been slated for April. And I've gotten to the point now where I just don't believe these guys. Anybody that's got anything to do with putting this film out, the lies are just knee deep. When people see it, they're going to understand. And you know, the truth is my motivation is getting this information to the public. I spent a significant amount of money to make this film. And if I have to just put it out, you know, just to make sure that it gets to the public, you know, it sounds like a bad spy movie, but that's, you know, what I'm going to end up having to do.
Well, it does certainly sound like there's some level of espionage and intrigue and the like.
It's ridiculous. And you know, hearing these words and these stories and this paranoia that some people might say coming out of my mouth is like, oh man, I do not want to be that guy. But the reality of it is that this has been a very treacherous road, and I don't think it's over yet.
Well, I think the whole field has been treacherous, particularly when we get to the more important aspects of it. And that brings me back to something you mentioned about perhaps MUFON being closely watched, which I have no doubt that would be the case. But also, you said you don't think, or you guys haven't been infiltrated. But my concern always is that all UFO groups of any significance, and MUFON obviously is probably the most significant such group in the world, are going to have some level of infiltration. And what makes
do we have members at various levels that might have some other agenda or be gathering information? That's impossible to prevent. So yeah, probably.
I mean, I always think of, and ironically, it was at a MUFON convention where this was all kind of blown out of the water back in 1989 when William Moore, who at the time was one of the top guys in the field, he was responsible for co-writing the first book about Roswell. He was key in the MJ-12 document releases. He was a key figure in the Benowitz affair, which we don't have to go into because that alone could take a show. But the idea that somebody that important would come out and go, I've been an AFOSI asset, I've been spying on you all, I've been feeding you information, I've been feeding information back to them. I mean, from then on, I think, even though I believe there was reason to be suspicious anyway of government interference within the UFO community, but I think from then on in, it was like, you said you don't want to be the paranoid guy. I think it's almost impossible not to be the paranoid guy operating in that kind of field. Yeah,
it's definitely been interesting. The government has had a program of disinformation, of ridicule, of there's a reason that the front-facing military establishment doesn't investigate UFOs, because they've been told not to. Common sense would dictate that if the U.S. military, the U.S. government was aware of technology that was so far advanced of ours, that of course they'd be studying it, but they still deny that they have been. And the U.S. government has no interest in UFOs. Well, that's ludicrous, because it would be their job to have a serious interest in UFOs. So common sense alone, and just thinking it through, pretty much reveals that there is absolutely no way that we're being told the truth about what's been going on with that. And we're still not being told the truth. What's happening now is that a new story is being rolled out so that they can whitewash the entire history between Project Blue Book, the Roswell days, and the days when Lue Elizondo's program came out. Because what was happening in that period of time was a whole lot of research, a whole lot of discovery, a whole lot of technical innovations that they have got to deny until the last man standing is gone. And that's what Accidental Truth is about. We peel the mask away from that.
That's what one of the things I love about your documentary, and there's a lot of things to love about it, but is that you address that gap between the Condon Committee and the end of Project Blue Book, and all the way up until 2004, and really all the way up until 2017, when this stuff all gets blown out of the water, that it's almost just a non-story, at least at the governmental and at a media level. And then when they reset this story, they try to pretend that nothing was going on before 2004 or 2017. Can you talk a little bit about that for our audience who mightn't be aware of that kind of timeline?
Yeah, we call it the new narrative. It's basically just whitewashing everything that happened. And we were able to get a very high-ranking, very well-known covert Army colonel, John Alexander, to basically admit to us that the whole time that he was denying there was any program, he was actually running one. And it peels the lid off of a whole bunch of other programs. We show the timelines of materials discoveries, materials recoveries. We expose the truth behind the cover stories for the origin of materials such as nitinol, the shape-shifting metal that was supposedly invented by a naval weapons research lab. We are able to prove that that actually came out of a research institute that was contracted at the time from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to study materials. So, it's just like the web of deception. We're slowly peeling away the layers.
Something which the documentary touches on again, another thing I loved about it, was that there were obviously different camps as to what happened from the 2017 rollout onwards. Like what happened with the New York Times increase in publicity that followed that, and then it all being taken seriously again at a governmental level, and the type of the new official narrative. But some people say that these were genuine leaks and it wasn't controlled. And there are other folks in the documentary that probably lean closer to my position who go, this seemed to be a controlled rollout. Like there seemed to be people behind, perhaps wanting to get in front of something for some reason, but wanting to release this information now, and it was all controlled leak. What's your kind of take on that?
Well, I think it's a high, as with everything in this field, it's not one thing. It's a big gray area. It's just like they can have these government programs, but if they're not official government programs, they're just what they call ad hoc, a bunch of guys getting together and taking advantage of all their clearances and all their access to stuff, but not running an official program. Then technically it wasn't an official program. So this rollout of information that came out, Ralph Blumenthal says, no, I don't believe it was an organized thing. And he's the one who broke the story. Other people disagree with him. And I think we cover both angles in the documentary and let people make up their own minds. My personal feeling is that there's no one faction guarding this information, and that there is a group, and I do believe that they're genuine guys like Lue and Chris, that they can't be the guys that just walk in on the ride in on the white horse and suddenly peel back the curtain. They just can't do it for a whole lot of reasons. And a lot of people fault them and say that they're part of this big cover-up conspiracy. And maybe in the beginning they were floating the line, but there was definitely a group that says, hey, we've got to get this information out to people somehow or another. And there's another group that says, hey, we will fight to protect this secret for another 100 years if we can. And when the story broke, obviously TTSA, To the Stars Academy, was waiting in the wings. It's not like Lue turned in his resignation to the Department of Defense and then all of a sudden went and they formed this group. It would have taken a couple years to put this all together. Although it's kind of played off, not officially, but you get the impression that it's kind of spontaneous, but there's no way it could have been. So certainly this was orchestrated. For at what level, we don't know, but Lue's resignation was not done without him knowing that he was going to go and they're going to start TTSA and they were going to do a big fundraiser and they're going to roll this stuff out. And then they were going to control the narrative and the information moving forward. And that whole thing kind of imploded for a variety of reasons that I don't mention in the movie, and I'm not going to go into because, it's a lot of it's speculation. But was it an organized rollout? It was organized to a certain point. There was backing from the highest and deepest sources. But then when it got to where it got, and I think where it really got out of hand is the crash retrieval report that the New York Times did, when all of a sudden that was like, oh, wait a minute, we can't go that far. And so then the people that are against the information getting out, they had some time to regroup and come back and defend against this. So that's when Lue started to get discredited, which he didn't deserve, in my opinion. That's when the information started getting rolled back. That's when this game started happening within, oh, let's form all these organizations, and then, oh no, let's trash that organization and form another one. It's just been a dog and pony show ever since. And it's gotten walked back to the point where they're placing doubt on even the original videos that got released, which, maybe I never completely signed off on those anyway. But at the end of the day, there are factions fighting over the release of information. And there are definitely groups that think that it's gone too far, too much has gotten out, and they need to walk it back. And there's evidence of that we present in the movie.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I was always, to be honest, a little bit suspicious of the videos myself, or perhaps the way that they were talked about in the media. It always makes me, I don't know, I never like it when somebody tells me that this is impossible to be on planet Earth unless they're, the head of a black project maybe. And then I suspect the black project are lying to me. Like when they rolled out Navy pilots who said, well, that wasn't ours. It's nothing like we have. Well, they wouldn't know what the latest generation of tech was being rolled out anyway, right? And I also thought, how do I trust that grainy video imagery of being something that hasn't been fabricated and released just for me to be, wow, stunned by? So I'm very suspicious of disclosure. It's not that I don't think there aren't any secrets. I'm just suspicious of if the US government came out tomorrow and said, we do have bodies at the bottom of some basement in Area 51, I would be thinking, well, I've always thought you've lied to me so far. Why are you telling me this truth now? My point is, it's a catch-22 with any disclosure anyway, because you don't trust these organizations. And then if they tell you something, how can you believe what they tell you?
Well, the story, we're eventually going to get a story, because the fact that we're not alone in the universe, or that there's other kinds of life forms that we can't even fathom what they are, interdimensional beings, all kinds of stuff that could be alive all around us that we can't even see. We can only see with our eyes a certain color spectrum. We can only hear with our ears a certain audio spectrum. And who knows what's going on? And who knows what's going on inside the Earth? The idea that there could be another species that has been here for a really long time and went underground to survive, Earth-changing cataclysms, and have developed, extraordinary technology because they've got a way big head start on us. That's quite possible. A lot of people believe it. The idea that there's life coming from outer space, quite possible. No scientist in this day and age will say that they doubt there's other life in the universe. Yeah, it could be anything, but we're going to get a story that the people at the deepest level, and I'm not talking about guys like Lue and Chris, that they are privy to some information, but they're not the gatekeepers. They are not privy to everything, and there's very few people that are, because it's so compartmentalized. There's got people in industry that got, you get a piece of material, you get a piece of technology, but they don't know anything about the whole story, and that's how they keep it, out of the public. So sooner or later, they know that they're going to have to reveal it, because there's too much activity in technological advances that are going to improve our sensors. There's too much technology in, I got to plug my computer into a power outlet. There's too much technology that's evolving. There's too much change that's happening for them to be able to cover it up for much longer. I mean, if Elon Musk lands on Mars and just happens to be on top of a pyramid, well, game over, right? So they've got to advance the knowledge to a point, but they've got to keep control of it, and they've got to do it in such a way that they can eliminate their responsibility, and they can say like, oh, look, we just invented anti-gravity, even though potentially they've had it for years. So the people in charge of rolling out the information are people we don't know. We don't expose them in the movie because we don't know who they are, but we do expose a pretty good idea of what that information is, and a pretty decent chain of evidence to prove it.
Oh, you really do. Do you want me to let you plug the computer, and I can just talk a little bit about your film in Midwest Weird Festival?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Let me go do that real quick.
So we're talking to Ron James, who's the director of the brand new documentary Accidental Truth. So if you are anywhere in the Eau Claire, Wisconsin area the first weekend of March 3 to 5, I'd encourage you to come along and check out this film, along with a bevy of other absolutely fantastic documentary and genre and sci-fi and fantasy movies. It's a heck of a lot of fun, and a lot of directors will be there, including, we had last week on the show Ronnie Ferguson, who's the director of Bigfoot and Marty, this fantastic documentary about a poet laureate who lives in the UP and spends a lot of his time talking, writing poetry about Bigfoot. So you can check out that other movie at Midwest Weird Fest as well. That's the first weekend, March 3 to 5 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and Ron James has returned, which is fantastic. Now, we were talking then just before you had to plug in your computer, and that's happened to me before in the middle of a broadcast. I'm like, I forgot to plug in the power source. It's about to
it
die.
said it had a full battery, so I thought I was going to be good. Sorry about that.
That's like I said, it's happened to me before. We were talking about this type of control gatekeeper levels, and the idea that there might be different factions in there as well, which to me is just fascinating, that we mightn't even be dealing with one level of a cover-up. There might be cover-ups on all different levels, and the idea that somebody is handed in the corporate world or the industrial world a piece of technology to work on or to back engineer or whatever we want to talk about, and they don't know its bigger part in a larger picture. There's a story, and I can't remember the individual, but this is a legitimate non-UFO story, but it bears some kind of weight to that type of position. There was a man who apparently had a industrial concern which had done nothing but make these very specific, I think, bolts and nuts for like years. Didn't know what they were for. It was a military contract. And one day, years later, after his company had been doing this for a long time, he was touring, I believe it was like an aircraft carrier or something. And then he recognized the nuts and bolts, and he said, that's what I was making them for all these years. He had no idea that it was contracted for some specific plate in an aircraft carrier, but there you go. So yeah, I'm sure that's the way that some of this thing rolls out. I do have to touch on something though, which you mentioned then, which I'm particularly interested in at the moment. And that is, I'm not saying I believe it or not, but it's fascinating, is the idea that there may be a civilization here on Earth among us, and potentially below the surface, because of course that takes us right back to the very beginning of the UFO phenomenon, at least the modern UFO phenomenon, the modern flying saucer phenomenon in 1947, where many cultural historians argue and other people in the field as well argue that Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver in many ways had set the tone for a lot that came after, with the Shaver mysteries in Amazing Stories pulp magazine in the mid-1940s. And as soon as flying saucers were seen, and the editor of Amazing Stories, who was Ray Palmer, was essentially, this is proof of the Shaver mystery. And he even hired Kenneth Arnold, the very first essential modern day flying saucer witness, to go and investigate in Maury Island, which is another story we might touch, because we could talk about that forever. But there seems to be a return to those early days where people like Palmer were saying these things come perhaps from beneath the surface of the earth. They don't come from out there. So that fascinates me.
Well, you know, even if there was an alien civilization that was monitoring Earth or visiting Earth, they'd have to have facilities here. They'd have to have some sort of a base. They're not in orbit. So, you know, I think, again, it's going to be one of those situations where the truth is this hybridization of a bunch of different possibilities. So could they be extraterrestrials that are using the oceans and you know, who knows what's going on under Antarctica? That's a whole other movie. But I think that they found things there that would be paradigm shifting if they were revealed. So yeah, is it an alien civilization that's using under the earth or in the earth for a base? Is it a civilization that has evolved here and been spacefaring all along? There's all kinds of possibilities, but the idea that there's some sort of non-human or alternative human intelligence that is concealed from the general public interacting with us is pretty obvious.
The Navy's part of being front and center of obviously with the Tic Tac videos. Again, it's not necessarily something I believe, but it's something which kind of tweaked my interest. Is because, as you mentioned, if these things are coming from below the waters of this planet, or even if they're extraterrestrial and have bases beneath the water, this is something that wasn't really front and center in UFO belief, or what ufologists talked about for a long time. But Ivan Sanderson, of course, talked about it back in the early 1970s in his book Invisible Residents. And today it seems to be, including your film again suggests this, it seems to be another idea which is coming back into vogue a little bit. Did you ever think maybe the US Navy are involved in this because it is somehow, you know, what's the word for beneath the surface, not beneath the surface of the earth, beneath the waters? I don't know, whatever the term is for something that lives beneath the seas. Did it ever make you just think for a minute, well, maybe that is what it is? Maybe it's from down there.
Well, again, my personal belief is that it's a combination of a lot of things. I think that it's highly likely that there's some sort of interaction with beings that don't live on Earth. I think that there's all kinds of life forms that we don't understand. I think there's definitely a presence of something on the planet, and that is intelligent, that is non-human or alternate human. And when I say that, I mean, you know, there could be an offshoot of humans that are just a completely different version of our society and our civilization that do not interact with us. They could be under so there's all kinds of possibilities. But yeah, certainly the Navy's been involved in this, and then certainly they've known about it for a long time. And this technology that we're seeing, I'm not ruling out that it could have been ours, but I would say that some of the technology and the innovations that led to that came from technology that we discovered that wasn't ours.
Yeah, that's certainly all very much food for thought. Where do you think this is going to go? I mean, not your film, but the type of revelations that we see in your film, and the whole kind of push towards disclosure, and the idea that we might get information. What more information? What do you think is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you have a personal opinion or an inside track?
Well, I think we're going to get more information, and I have a little bit of an inside track because on Monday I'm flying to Washington D.C. and MUFON is having a special event there where we are going to announce to the world that we are participating as civilian advisors to some of these programs and committees on Congress, and so we're getting a seat at the table. And they know what we know, and we know that they know what we know, and we know that they know what we know that they know. And so, you know, at some point, you can't be sitting across from a committee member that just came out of a classified briefing, and you know what he was told. And at some point, you know, we're gonna be very instrumental in fostering as much information to the forefront as we possibly can. It's our mission. And so the fact that we've gained enough credibility to be accepted into those circles I'm optimistic that we're going to get more information, but it's like we say in the movie, we might get some information, but we're probably never going to get all of it. And at the end of the day, the information we do get is going to be whatever they decide to tell us. But at some point, it has to be revealed, because otherwise it's going to end up being revealed through uncontrolled circumstances.
There must have been a big, I mean, I can't say there must have been a big change, but there must have been some impact on MUFON from 2017 onwards. Like, did you see a whole lot of more media requests come in, or was it the organization all of a sudden, not that it was ever an organization I think that wasn't taken seriously, but was it somehow taken more seriously by government post 2017, by media post 2017? Like, how did it impact MUFON?
Well, you know, I'm not going to take a lot of credit, but when around 2017, a little bit before that, was when I started MUFON Television. And one of the things, it was a joint venture between my company and MUFON. And one of the things that I've really tried to help them do is to, you know, make sure that the public really knows what we're all about. You know, any organization that is the biggest and largest and oldest in any field has a target on its back. And any organization that has been around for a long time has things that happen that it could be, you know, out there, people upset about something, and, you know, it's just nonsense, but it happens. And so people have in the past been very quick to just jump on anything they could pounce on MUFON for, because we're the big guys in the block. And when we started MUFON Television, we also had a leadership change inside of MUFON, and the man that's director right now is on board with improving and evolving this organization to levels that nobody could have imagined. And Dave McDonald is just an amazing leader. And we've all been able to work together to kind of take this organization to the next level. It used to be a small group of investigators worldwide, and it still is. But we have a whole experiencer wing that's advancing the experiencer phenomenon research. We have our television network where we're putting out shows that people won't see anywhere else. We have all kinds of things that we're doing for just the average person to find community within the UFO field, to find other people to talk to, like minds, events to go to, that nobody else is doing. And as this information unfolds, more and more people are going to need that, because, you know, coming to grips with the idea that we're not alone, whatever that means, is going to be a easy pill for some people to swallow, and it's also going to be a tough pill for some people to swallow. And MUFON is there. You know, join MUFON, find your friends, we say.
It's interesting when you talk about a revelation of more information being difficult, perhaps socially, perhaps psychologically, for some people. I can't even remember where it was. It might even have been your documentary. I consume so much UFO content. You can imagine it's not funny. But somebody made the suggestion that they thought culturally and socially, we would be able to take the idea of extraterrestrial visitation now far easier than we would be able to take the idea that there'd been a sequestered civilization living alongside us forever. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, that's probably true, because, you know, human beings are pretty warlike. If Russia thought there was somebody else to conquer and they had to fight them for the North Pole, they'd be sending submarines. So if there is another culture living on the planet, I have a greater understanding for why they need to keep their presence a secret than I would aliens. If they're here and they know that if we know they're here, we're going to figure out some reason to attack them. So it's a sad commentary on humanity, but unfortunately, I think that, you know, we're being allowed to self-determine. And if we keep going down the path we're going down, the destruction of the planet, the constant warfare with each other, the primitive mentality, we're going to self-destruct before we get the invitation to become part of any expanded family. So, you know, humanity needs to wake up. And whenever we talk about the revelation of non-human intelligence, people used to say, well, it's going to mess up everything. It's going to change the way people have religion. It's going to throw society into a tailspin. You know, the whole early committees that did these reports about the impact of this knowledge and partially why it was kept a secret, they're overlooking one thing. And the people that say today, well, of course we can handle the truth, they're overlooking one thing as well. And it's context. if we were to be told tomorrow, yes, there's extraterrestrials, they've visited the Earth from time to time, they're kind of keeping an eye on us, they don't bother us, we don't bother them, everything's fine. Hey, that's cool. Most people are just going to go, yeah, I knew that something like that was happening. They're going to go on with their lives and no problem. But if it's, yeah, there's extraterrestrials, we don't know what they want. They're clearly in control. We don't know what their agenda is. We're helpless against their technology. And we're starting to think that there might be a nefarious plan at play. Well, that's a whole different story. That would truly throw society into a panic. So it's not so much disclosure, it's the context that comes with that disclosure that will be what dictates the impact on society.
I think that's important to look at it from that perspective as well. What else I think is important to look at the perspective your documentary does, is its effect of this phenomenon on consciousness, or the way our consciousness interacts with the phenomenon. And you even talk about a study of contactees or abductees' brains, and how there's a part of the brain which seems to behave differently in people who are experiencers than a lot of other people. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect, the consciousness aspect, and about that brain study or psychiatric study?
Yeah, so Dr. Garry Nolan, who is on the record of having studied questionable materials, he's a fascinating scientist. And one of the things that he's done is he's discovered that among people with certain mental abilities, there's a pronounced difference in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia that has traditionally been thought to be part of like psychic abilities and premonitions, things like that. These people have a more pronounced and more evolved section of the brain, and it seems to be pointing to being able to perceive things that other people can't, right? Be it communications, be it visual, be it audio. At any rate, it almost represents a different version of Homo sapien, and this has been scientifically discovered and is coming out in the film, and it lends some credence. I'm a believer in simulation theory. I think that if you take the basic laws of physics and you look at how the universe works, it's clear that this is a illusionary reality being governed by mathematical algorithms. So yes, it's a simulation, even if you don't want to admit it. You know, it's the basic construct of it is in alignment with that formula. You know, so are we embryos plugged into some matrix or something? I don't know about that, but I will say that physical reality is an illusion. The mathematics rules the way the illusion unfolds to our senses, and so yeah, we're living in a simulation. And the reason I'm saying that, and we don't go this far in the film, but the reason I'm saying that is because once you understand that, then you realize that anything is possible. Yeah, with the stroke of a cosmic keyboard, you can change reality. And so the idea that, are these beings from Alpha Centauri? Are they inside the Earth? Are they interdimensional? The only thing that really matters in all those questions is that they are. And how is that possible? And so I think that one of the things that one of the biggest lessons that we're going to learn as we peel away the layers of this mystery is, what is the true nature of our reality and what is the true nature of our existence? And that is, I think, a lot of what these are the breadcrumbs we're being given by the stuff that we're experiencing and seeing and unfolding. And that's why even the people that have this information, it's way more complicated than you think. It's not a bunch of guys found a flying saucer one day and you know, decided to cover it up and blah blah blah. That's a part of it, but it goes way deeper. And you know, the guys that did these programs that are unveiled in the film, you know, they studied all kinds of stuff that had to do with consciousness and had to do with esoteric things, and they've been trashed for it in some shows. But you know, stuff that happens at Skinwalker Ranch, that's the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, it's a broader, very complicated thing.
Jeez, I love the face of the new MUFON, that we can have these type of discussions. It isn't all just nuts and bolts ETs. I'm very sympathetic to that idea as well, by the way. I tend to think that there was an old tradition going back to Christian Gnosticism and Neoplatonism and other mystical traditions, which suggested that this reality was below somehow a higher reality. And the way we best understand that today, you're right, because of the popularity of the Matrix films, is to discuss the Matrix as some type of allegory for it, that we're plugged into machines. Well, we mightn't really be plugged into machines. The allegory or the story, I think, holds true that maybe this reality is nowhere near the base reality we think it is, that there are more things going on above us. And the sci-fi author P.K. Dick, of course, who is the mind behind things like Blade Runner and Man in the High Castle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that was very much his own personal experiences. He thought we were living in this non-real, for lack of a better term, reality, and there was something higher above it that was trying to send him messages to let him know this. And that perhaps ties in with what we're talking about consciousness, about people who have contacts with whatever this other intelligence is. Maybe there is an intelligence outside of this reality which is trying to get messages through to us.
Well, you know, one of the people in my film who's very instrumental in these programs that we uncover, he says it very succinctly. He says, we're not even at the point where we're asking the right questions yet. And I think that's true. You know, Philip K. Dick was a diagnosed schizophrenic, and it really makes you wonder if that condition isn't brought about because of some kind of additional ability to perceive things, you know, that rather than that, oh, they're just crazy. Because I have a friend who's schizophrenic, and every once in a while he will say the most profound things. And it's like, okay, where'd you get that? You know, so the mystery is just, it's amazing. And I'd like to say that accidental truth explains everything, but you know what? It really unveils a lot of facts that get us to a point. I like to say that the guys like, that are out there, the front-facing people that are in the movie, guys like Nick Pope and Lue and Chris Mellon, and some of the scientists that studied this stuff, they're able to go right up almost to the wall of, you know, admitting that there's this unknown intelligence, but there's a little bit of air in between that wall and where they're at today. And accidental truth sucks all that air out of the room. There's nowhere left to go. They're just going to have to start talking. And, because they can't just continue to say the same stuff. And we're not allowing them the opportunity to stay parked at the wall. If they're going to continue to talk, we've got to get deeper down the rabbit hole.
And that's a hard sorry,
no,
no,
go ahead.
I
was going to say, but it doesn't answer. At the end of the day, even though it reveals a whole lot, it leaves more questions than answers. And this thing is going to be like that forever, I think.
And how do you have that conversation with people anyway? Or let's just say that there is one of these insider groups and it's aware that the UFO phenomenon is more complicated than what perhaps science fiction has led us to believe. How do you have that conversation in a way that reveals to the general public, in a disclosure? How would you possibly even say that, well, this reality mightn't be base reality and there are other consciousnesses that's a much harder thing to say than, well, maybe we did get something that crashed in 47 and we're not exactly sure what it is, but they're two very different conversations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But one leads to the other. I mean, it would be a nice start. Yeah, we got something in 47. Here's some of the stuff, you know, that'd be a good place to start. They don't have to have all the answers, but it would be nice to get some instead of just this continued ambiguity.
Yeah, no, I think where people need to start as thinkers, and I think it's the place you are, is to recognize that we don't know all of the answers. I think too many people in the broader Fortean field, not just in ufology, but in cryptozoology and people who are interested in the supernatural, whatever else, they tend to think that they know all the answers. Like I had a very good friend, he's passed now, God bless him. He was a wonderful guy. He wasn't incredibly interested in the UFO phenomenon. The only reason I'm telling you his story is because I think it's quite reflective. He'd read a book or two, and he was certain that he knew all the realities. Oh, they're from this planet, and this is the way their propulsion systems work. And he was, again, somebody just with a passing interest. But I think too many people who were either just with a passing interest or too many people who were deeply into this, they really think they know the answers. I'd be honest. I mean, I have my theories, but I don't have any answers to what the reality of this stuff is.
No, you know, as long as I've been in the field, people will say, well, What do you believe? And I'm actually very limited on what I would sit down and put stakes on. And that is, there's plenty of evidence of a non-human interaction with planet Earth and with our species going back as far as recorded history. There's plenty of evidence for that. Is it provable beyond a shadow of a doubt? No, but there's plenty of evidence. It's a reasonable hypothesis. Does the government know a lot more than they're telling us? Absolutely. There's that is completely proven. And is there life outside of Earth? There has to be. So those three things, you want to start talking about bases on Mars and secret space programs and, you know, all this stuff. It's just, my gray box is huge. My white box is very small. My black box is almost as big as my gray box. So, you know, the stuff that anybody who says they know this, the answers to this, they don't. And what happens in this field, unfortunately, is that people get attached to what they have come to believe. And then you get this crazy infighting. You know, the cattle mutilation thing is one example. Is you've got people that are just venomous about their belief that cattle mutilations are aliens. And then we've got Christopher O'Brien, who's written 4 books about it, that he's more convinced that it has something to do with a terrestrial phenomenon. And then there's other people who think that it's a psyop by the government and that they're doing some kind of weird monitoring of so who knows? But the rabidness by which people will cling to their beliefs and fight for them has torn the field apart. And it's been that way from day one. And so one of the things that I've come to believe is that this stuff can all be right because reality is pretty flexible. You know, so different things can be at play at the same time and still be true. It's a weird thing, but you know, like I said, reality is pretty flexible.
Yeah, I'm optimistic when I talk to people like you that there is this open-mindedness of how to approach everything. But at the same time, I think, forget even about ufology, just think of general humanity's tend towards, you know, to branching off into sects, to branching off into their own belief systems or religious ideology or whatever. It seems to me, I'll be honest, I don't see a way forward for people not to leave those hostile camps and to open up. And that's me I'm very much a personal optimist, but I'm a terrible social pessimist. Like I don't see a way forward. Do you think there's a way forward? I mean, forget about MUFON itself for a moment. Do you think there's a way forward for the field to somehow, I don't know, get to a level where we can approach this, perhaps objectively is probably the wrong term, but without those type of belief blinders on?
Well, I mean, the condition that's causing that is the same condition that's causing the war in Ukraine. You know, if you would have asked me, I might mention, by the way, the film is full of original 3D animations that were done in Unreal Engine, and my entire animation team is in Ukraine. And toward the end of the production, they were still trying to work, and I was getting, one day I would get a completed scene for the movie sent to me across the internet. The next day I'd get a video of a missile flying over the guy's house, and these guys hung in there as long as they could to get this stuff done. And so I just want to mention that what's happening over there is showing me that, I mean, who does that? Who does what Russia has done? And who stands by and watches it, like what China's doing, and who helps it with what Iran is doing? This is absolute insanity. This is not how a species with this level of technology should be acting on any level. And we are failing bitterly. And yeah, so when we talk about, is there any hope for you know, commonality among factions in ufology or factions in humanity, I might have been a lot more optimistic a year ago, but now I'm just shaking my head. And if you extrapolate that out further into the idea that this is a kind of a simulation and we are just spiritual, energetic beings having a human experience that probably means nothing at the end of the day, and that we're just here to learn, then we're being forged individually by the things that happen around us that we decide to agree with and sign off on. And we're being forged by our own actions and the beliefs that we evolve. So, you know, it all just gets very, very spiritual, for lack of a better word. Rather it's the ET question, or rather it's the question of how we react to what's happening in this show. It's all tied together. and it's very profound.
It is profound. And it being a spiritual experience, which I tend to agree with you, it likely is. There's negative and there's positive, obviously, spiritualities and spiritual energies. Do you ever think that sometimes, if this is a simulation, and given that I think it's naive not to think there's positive and negative energies, that a lot of this just might be intentional deceit to trap us somehow in fighting each other, or to trap us on this planet, or to trap us in this reality, or to make us forget who we are at a higher spiritual level?
You know, a lot of people say that, but I question how much power these things actually have. I mean, are we really that pathetically vulnerable to these invisible outside forces that can literally manipulate our destiny? Or are we truly that low on the totem pole? I tend to think that the choice, you know, there's certainly forces at play, you know, the illusion of good and evil. I'm not even sure that that's real. I think that as you move up the ladder, that kind of goes away. If you look at the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, remember how at the end the evil dude turned out to be Willy Wonka's partner, and he was just there to test the character of the people?
Yeah, my daughter loves that movie.
That might not be too far from the truth. I'm not talking about the one with Johnny Depp, because
no, I know the
Gene
Wilder one. Yeah,
but the you know, that might not be far from the truth. Is that we have this illusion of duality, basically because it tempers our evolution as a conscious being. And so, you know, eventually the whole idea is to find our way back to a unity consciousness, and you can't be forced into that. You have to take that road, no matter how long, no matter how many lives you have to take, no matter what it takes. You have to voluntarily make your way back to a place of peace. And so the best way to do that is to throw yourself into a sandbox and experience everything you could possibly experience, and work through it. As you know, that's how I believe we earn our autonomy in other worlds and other existences.
Well, it was a fascinating conversation with you.
I know I shouldn't have gone all there, but we did.
Oh, I'm glad you did. That's where I want this show to go. I'd like it to go in different places. How do people get a hold of what you're doing? And I don't know how to watch MUFON TV myself. I'm a little bit, it's funny because I run a festival, but I don't spend a lot of time watching TV at all. So how do people find where MUFON TV is? How do they watch your shows? How do they keep up with what you're doing? Have you got some URL?
Yeah. MUFON TV is a subscription-based thing, so you have to subscribe. There's plenty of free content. My shows are free. You can go to MUFONtelevision.com, and there's a little slider. You can click on the Spacetime show. That's got some episodes of the show. It doesn't have them all. And then buried inside of MUFON TV is the pages for Accidental Truth. And you can get there two ways. You can do MUFONtelevision.com/AT Insider, or you can do Accidental Truths with an S.com, and it'll forward there. So you could go check out more about the movie. There's a little, not really a trailer, but a little teaser. And there's all kinds of information about the film. You could buy an Accidental Truth t-shirt. You can probably help me out with upcoming legal expenses. So yeah, that's where it would be.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'd encourage everybody to go and check out those URLs. I'd also encourage anybody who can get to Eau Claire, Wisconsin in the first weekend of March, which is March 3 to 5 this weekend, to come to Midwest Weird Fest and check out Accidental Truth on the big screen, along with a lot of other.
You guys are going to be the first ones to show
up.
Wow. I know I might try to get out there myself. I'm going to be speaking at Alien Con, so I'm not going to be able to.
Oh,
but
no.
Yeah.
That's a shame. But yeah, well, I'd love to meet you one day in person anyway. But this has been a great chat. And until I get to talk to you again, Ron, and until I get to talk to everybody out there, keep it weird.
Thanks.